In February 1963, Nasser's rival in Iraq, Abdulkarim Qasim, was ousted from power and executed by firing squad after a coup led by the Nasserists and the Iraqi Ba'ath Party, which may have also received assistance from the American Central Intelligence Agency. The new Ba'ath government quickly initiated a harsh crackdown on the communists who had supported Qasim. The Nasserist Abdul Salam Aref, who had been instrumental in bringing Qasim to power 5 years prior, was appointed as president, creating anticipations of an Egyptian-Iraqi union that would make up for the loss of the Syrian Union 2 years prior. While there was division within the Iraqi government regarding joining the Nasser-led union, when the Ba'athists took control in Syria in March, they were explicit about their wish to rejoin the UAR with enhanced autonomy. On March 14th, Nasser initiated discussions with the governments of Syria and Iraq on establishing a new union among the 3 states. However, his actions jeopardized the negotiations. He attempted to dominate the discussions and demanded to be referred to as president by the attendees, while addressing them by their first names. Consequently, although a loose framework for union was reached, there were hesitations in Syria and Iraq, followed by delays, and ultimately the agreement disintegrated. There would be no new United Arab Republic. Nasser's socialist economic reforms and his military involvement in Yemen undermined his political standing in Egypt, and by the mid-1960s, his rule was being increasingly challenged within his own administration. Nasser had willingly transferred command of the army to his close associate Amer. Given the opportunity, Amer had established his own political power base through his control over the army and the security agencies. To curtail Amer's influence on military personnel, in 1961, Nasser established a presidential council that was required to approve senior military appointments. In the following year, Nasser dismissed Amer as defense minister in a bid to exert greater control over the army. But completely removing him was not feasible, as he continued to be well-liked among both the officer corps and the enlisted men. As part of his strategy to strengthen his domestic position, in March 1964, Nasser adopted a new constitution that designated him as the supreme commander of the Egyptian army, with Amer serving as deputy commander. In March 1965, Nasser was re-elected for another 6-year term as president after an election in which no other candidates were permitted to participate. This electoral success obscured the reality that Nasser's popularity was waning. Even though Nasser managed to commemorate the completion of the first phase of the construction of the Aswan Dam in 1964, his economic policies began to struggle. There was a deficit of essential consumer goods, and the nation was becoming heavily dependent on foreign imports, which weakened the balance of trade and increased government debt. While striving to solidify his grip on power domestically, Nasser still faced persisting challenges regarding Israel and his relations with other Arab leaders. Nasser was convinced that Arab unity was essential for addressing the situation with Israel. In January 1964, after discovering that Israel intended to reroute the waters of the Jordan River to irrigate the Negev desert, he convened an Arab League conference in Cairo, during which he approved the establishment of the Palestine Liberation Organization, directed by the Palestinian diplomat Ahmad al-Shukayri. The PLO possessed a military branch, the Palestine Liberation Army, which was mainly overseen by the nations that hosted it, namely Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. While Nasser was eager not to become embroiled in conflict with Israel until the Arabs were prepared for it, a younger group of Palestinian activists who had matured in refugee camps after the 1948 war were eager to confront Israel and reclaim their homeland. In the early 1960s, they initiated the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, commonly known as Fatah. By 1965, Fatah operatives were conducting numerous raids into Israel, yet Nasser and the Arab leaders remained wary. Following a coup in February 1966, a new Syrian administration assumed power advocating for a Palestinian liberation struggle, leading to heightened tensions between Israel and Syria. In early 1967, the Soviet Union cautioned Nasser multiple times about an imminent Israeli invasion of Syria, yet the Egyptian leader resisted the mounting demands for conflict. In March, the Israelis asserted their right to cultivate the demilitarized zone between Israel and Syria, igniting skirmishes between both sides. After the Israeli Air Force downed 6 Syrian aircraft in early April, Nasser faced escalating pressure from the Arab world to act. As the Soviets persisted with their alerts regarding an Israeli invasion of Syria, Nasser directed Egyptian forces to the Sinai Peninsula and called for the withdrawal of UN peacekeeping troops stationed there on May 16, 1967, which was approved 2 days later. While Amer suggested a preemptive strike against Israel, Nasser notified both the United States and the Soviet Union that he would adopt a defensive posture. Despite continuing doubts concerning the Egyptian army's capabilities, by the end of May, Nasser was convinced that war was unavoidable. On the 23rd, he blocked the Straits of Tiran between Sinai and Saudi Arabia to Israeli maritime traffic, effectively cutting off Israel's access to the Red Sea, which the Israelis deemed a declaration of war. On May 30th, King Hussein of Jordan traveled to Cairo and formalized the alliance with Egypt and Syria, but the decision came too late for the two nations to coordinate any joint military actions before Israel initiated its offensive. Around 7:30 a.m. on the morning of June 5th, the Israeli Air Force began its assault on Egypt. Abdel Hakim Amer was en route to the front at that moment, and Egyptian anti-aircraft personnel had been instructed not to engage while he was airborne. As a consequence, more than 300 Egyptian aircraft were damaged while on the ground within a period of 2 hours. Meanwhile, Israeli tanks made significant progress on the ground in Sinai and took control of the town of El Arish. The next day, Israeli troops overtook the Gaza Strip and were also making strides against the Jordanians in the West Bank, compelling thousands of Palestinian refugees to flee across the Jordan River toward the Jordanian capital of Amman. Nasser went to Amer's command center demanding explanations, and the two former allies blamed one another for the catastrophe. Amer assured Nasser that an Egyptian counteroffensive would drive the Israelis back, but in reality, numerous Egyptian officers retreated to Cairo when confronted with the Israeli assault, enabling the Israelis to capture the Sinai Peninsula with minimal resistance. It was not until the 9th of June that Nasser understood the severity of the conflict. That evening, he spoke to the nation and acknowledged there had been a significant setback. Meanwhile, Israel launched an attack on Syria and took control of the Golan Heights. By the conclusion of the 10th of June, at the end of what is now referred to as the Six-Day War, Israeli forces had seized control of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. During his address on the 9th of June, Nasser offered his resignation from all his political and military positions and suggested that Vice President Zakaria Mohiuddin would take over his role. Mohiuddin had not been made aware of Nasser's plans in advance and declined to do so. That night, over 2 million Egyptians flooded the streets pleading with Nasser to stay in power, prompting him to retract his resignation the next day. On the 11th of June, Nasser removed Amer from his command and appointed Chief of Staff Mohammed Fawzi in his stead. The decision sparked outrage among Amer's supporters in the army, and in late August, Nasser confronted Amer for conspiring against him. Despite Amer's denials, he and a group of 50 officers were taken into custody. While awaiting trial, Amer ingested poison and passed away on the 13th of September, 1967. Despite the rivalry and animosity between Nasser and Amer that led to the latter's tragic end, Nasser continued to refer to the deceased commander as the person closest to me. Sentimental factors aside, in early 1968, Nasser persisted in clearing the army of Amer's sympathizers and reorganized his cabinet by dismissing military officials and appointing civilians in their places. While Nasser vowed further democratization and liberalization, he concentrated more authority in his control than ever before. As Nasser solidified his power domestically, the conflict with Israel was not officially resolved, and the Sinai continued under Israeli rule. In late August 1967, Nasser participated in the Arab League summit in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum, where he was eclipsed by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. On the 1st of September, the leaders reached a consensus on the Khartoum Resolution, which declared, "No peace with Israel, no negotiation with Israel, no acknowledgement of Israel." Nasser also consented to a ceasefire in the northern Yemen civil war, enabling him to withdraw his forces. In November, Nasser backed UN Security Council Resolution 242, which demanded Israeli withdrawal from the territory seized during the Six-Day War. The Soviet Union offered Nasser military assistance to aid in the restoration of the Egyptian army. For the rest of his presidency, Nasser aligned with the communists in opposition to the United States in his foreign policy, and in January 1968, he permitted the Soviets to establish 3 naval bases on Egyptian territory. Meanwhile, the PLO and the Fatah movement, led by the rising leader Yasser Arafat, relocated to the border town of Karameh in Jordan and started conducting guerrilla attacks across the river to the West Bank against Israel. On March 21, 1968, Israeli forces launched a significant assault on the Palestinians in an attempt to dismantle the camps and capture Arafat. The Palestinians fought fiercely at Karameh and were subsequently bolstered by the Jordanian army, which compelled the Israelis to retreat. The Israelis incurred severe losses, with nearly 30 killed and about 70 wounded. While Palestinian fatalities exceeded 100, the battle represented a win for the Arab forces and helped restore some of the damaged Arab pride following the catastrophic defeat in the Six-Day War. Nasser was pleased with Fatah's achievements and extended an invitation to Arafat and the PLO leaders to Cairo. During this meeting, Nasser transferred the leadership of the Arab struggle against Israel to Fatah, noting that the Palestinians had more freedom to advance the cause as they were not constrained by UN resolutions. Nasser committed to supplying Arafat with all necessary military and financial support to liberate Palestine. But when Arafat was unable to specify how long this would take, Nasser proposed a peace compromise involving a Palestinian state encompassing the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, referred to as the two-state solution. Israel had refused to relinquish its gains from the Six-Day War, and in January 1968, Nasser initiated a war of attrition by targeting Israeli positions on the eastern bank of the Suez Canal in a bid to reclaim the Sinai Peninsula. The Israelis retaliated by assaulting Egyptian cities located on the canal's western bank. These persistent conflicts instigated concerns in both the United States and the Soviet Union that they might become involved in the war. And late in 1969, the two superpowers began to take measures to encourage Egypt and Israel to conclude the border skirmishes before they escalated into a new extensive war. U.S. Secretary of State William Rogers devised a plan anchored in Resolution 242, which advocated for an immediate ceasefire while cautioning the Israelis that if they declined, they could not count on continued U.S. support. Despite Israel's dismissal of the Rogers Plan, Nasser accepted the proposal in June 1970, and in August, a ceasefire was established, with the Israelis remaining in place in Sinai. Nasser soon breached the agreement by deploying Soviet surface-to-air missile systems to the west bank of the Suez Canal. While Nasser and King Hussein of Jordan endorsed the Rogers Plan, the PLO opposed it, viewing it as an act of treachery by the Egyptian leader. In retaliation, the Palestinians worked to undermine King Hussein's authority in Jordan. The most significant demonstration occurred in early September 1970 when the Popular Front of the Liberation of Palestine orchestrated the hijacking of 4 commercial aircraft and compelled them to land at Dawson Field near Amman. After the passengers were evacuated, the PFLP detonated the planes and made demands for an exchange of Palestinian prisoners in Israel and Europe in return for the hostages from the aircraft. Although Nasser succeeded in negotiating an agreement following the hijackings, on the 16th of September, the Jordanian army launched an attack against the PLO in an effort to eliminate the organization. The Syrians became further involved in the ensuing days, and at this critical point, Nasser dispatched an Arab League delegation to persuade Arafat to agree to a ceasefire. He convened an emergency meeting of the Arab League in Cairo for the 27th of September. During a tense meeting, Hussein and Arafat exchanged insults, yet ultimately signed an agreement that allowed the Jordanians to regain control of vital cities, while Hussein consented to appoint a Palestinian as prime minister. The strained meeting between the Arab leaders adversely affected Nasser's health. A heavy smoker throughout his adult life who had been diagnosed with diabetes in his late 30s, Nasser had been unwell for some time. His health deteriorated further in the wake of traumatic events, including the disintegration of the Union with Syria, defeat in the 6 Days War, and his power struggle with Amir. Since 1967, he had endured several heart attacks, though these were not disclosed to the public. On the 28th of September, 1970, mere hours after saying goodbye to the Emir of Kuwait, the last Arab leader to depart the Cairo conference, Nasser suffered a heart attack and was taken home, where he passed away that evening at the young age of 52. An estimated 5 million mourners gathered for his funeral in Cairo on the 1st of October, 1970. Both King Hussein and Yasser Arafat, the two men who had argued so fiercely days before, attended the funeral and cried openly. Nasser was succeeded as president by Anwar Sadat. As Speaker of the National Assembly for most of the 1960s, Sadat had not taken a significant role in Nasser's administration, but he had been appointed vice president in December 1969. After ascending to the presidency, he remained in office until his assassination in October 1981. Gamal Abdel Nasser leaves a profound legacy in Egypt and the broader Arab world. His political beliefs, particularly his pan-Arab nationalism, emerged from the tumultuous era of Arab history in the 1920s and 1930s, as the Arabs sought to expel the British and French from the Middle East in the wake of the First World War. From this backdrop, he rose as a leader of the Association of Free Officers that overthrew the British-supported monarchy in Egypt in 1952. After consolidating power in 1954, Nasser established himself as a distinctive leader of his time. He was deeply committed to Pan-Arabism and was also resolute that Egypt would pursue its own path in the Cold War, avoiding close alliances with either the US or the Soviet Union. Instead, he embraced a more moderate form of socialism. His policies yielded some success, while the development of the Aswan Dam significantly transformed Egypt's economy in various ways. Yet, Nasser will ultimately be evaluated based on his foreign policies. On one hand, Nasser's choice to nationalize the Suez Canal and his defiance against Britain and France appears reasonable in hindsight, ending European interference in what was a sovereign nation, while it has also secured for him a position in the records of broader modern history as African decolonization hastened rapidly after Suez. However, in other areas, his initiatives were less effective. The United Arab Republic was brief. His involvement in the North Yemen civil war during the 1960s was misguided, and his stance towards Israel left Egypt more vulnerable on its northeastern border at the time of his death than when he came to power in the mid-1950s. In summary, there were both achievements and setbacks during Nasser's rule, but there is no denying he was one of the more significant figures in modern Arab history. What are your thoughts on Gamal Abdel Nasser? Was he one of the most remarkable political leaders in Arab history who dealt a severe blow to British and French colonial aspirations at Suez? Or is this overshadowed by his poor political choices in the 1960s? Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what topics you'd like to see next.